Welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're talking about environment design. That's coming up next. Alright, welcome to the Environment Design Series, Episode 5. Today we are talking about color. And this is a topic I could go into a ton of depth about. I probably eventually will actually make a full video about color. But for today's episode, I'll keep it kind of related mostly to how color and value kind of coexist, because we're painting our value painting into color. So also really quickly, I just want to show you, since I'm going to be doing a sped up commentary over my painting to color, I just want to show you how to make a layer that you can turn your saturation down and turn everything back to grayscale. So if you create a effects layer, which is, or not an effects layer, but an adjustment layer, which is the icon just left of the group. If you come up here to hue saturation and create that, it'll give you a hue saturation adjustment layer, and whatever that's over the top of will be affected. So if I turn the saturation down, you won't see anything happen, but if I now stack this over the top of all my layers, you'll see that this has gone to all grayscale. So everything underneath this hue saturation adjustment layer will be without saturation as long as I slide it down. So that's how you create one of those. You'll see in the commentary part of this video, you'll see me, as I paint into color, you'll see me checking my using one of those adjustment layers to check back to my grayscale as I go. So that's how I do that. Okay, so that said, let's go ahead and actually look at some color really quick. Okay, so these colors, if you're like me anyways, some of them actually look brighter than others. Like for example, this blue here, this blue does not look as bright as this like lime green. But if you actually look here, so if I color pick this, you can see, let's actually pull up. Let's just pull this out. Let's pull this out here, so you can actually see the box a little bit better. So we're all the way up here, the very top right. That's 100% saturation and 100 and no value. Well, it's along the slider where there's no value. If I go all the way to the left. But now see how bright this looks and see how much darker this looks. But if I click this one, it's also at the very top, 100%. So it's also in the identical location. And what that means is, technically speaking here, if I turn on my adjustment layer here, watch all these colors. For a second, your eyes kind of get confused, like what just happened, and then as you settle, you start realizing that every one of those colors is the exact same value. And the value of a color at 100% saturation, up on this top right of the picker box, color picker box, they're all 50% value. So that's like a holy moly kind of a moment, right? Like, you think you're painting with this super bright color, but as you get all that saturation, if you get too much saturation into that color, you're painting with a 50% value. That is a big deal. That's really quite dark. That's the middle of the road. So when you add saturation, you're adding value. And as you get deeper and deeper into the values, the less saturation can impact the value, because you're getting closer to black. And obviously, once you get to black, it doesn't matter how saturated you go, you're black across the board. So basically, just keep that in mind. Saturation plus saturation is going to equal some additional value. Okay, so let's look at a few other colors here. So if we look at these colors now, these colors are just about in the middle of the road with value and saturation. You'll see here, and you'll notice that some of these colors still feel like the color they're supposed to be. This still feels like a deep red. This feels like a deep red right here. This feels like a dark blue. This feels like dark purple, and these greens are just starting to actually feel like a normal green at this point. Whereas the yellow and the orange, they both look like mud brown. And the reason for this is that certain colors don't really exist in certain ranges of value. So as we get too much value, deeper value, yellow stops being yellow. There's no, yellow doesn't have a place in a value scale that goes too deep. Whereas green, if it goes too bright, it just feels really, really fake. And so we actually need a deeper value to start getting real good, like a nice green read. And then we've got blue that just looks great no matter where you go with it, high value, low value, kind of a thing. And red and then purple is kind of purple is blue and red mixed together, so kind of inherently it also reads really well in the deeper values and higher values. So just remember, when you're painting greens, if you've ever been painting like landscape and you're trying to get your grasses in or trees in and you just think it looks so fake and you're trying to figure out why, just remember that if you're up here in these high saturation, high value ranges, it just looks absolutely fake. We don't start getting into decent looking greens until we're down here. And bringing a little bit of yellow in, like this is where the natural world actually lives for greens, like down in here, way down in here. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, the way that we start to marry these colors together, and what we see in the natural world, is a lot of gray. Gray is the common denominator that makes colors work together. Look how, especially if we go back to this, look at how bad these look next to each other. You would not want to put any of these next to each other unless you're making some kind of graphic design, thing or something that's supposed to like make your eye almost hurt. But if we add gray to these colors, now you can start to feel how you could put this next to this, and even though they're literally the opposites, orange and blue, you can see how they could transition. You could find a way to transition these two without a ton of work. Same with this green and this red, and these are all just 50% value, 50% saturation, just right smack in the middle. And even that is probably more saturation than a lot of times you're going to get. So there's a lot of times when you'll be even deeper in value and lower in saturation, like down in here. This is a common area. So just remember though, if you're trying to get yellow into the equation and you want real yellow, you still have to come up in here to get to your yellow, because of that, like I said, because of that situation where it literally only exists in a high value range, basically from 0 to probably 30 ish is where you can find your yellows, and then you start getting into mud. So the reason that all this is important is that as you go to color with your grayscale, you have to understand what grays will equal what colors well. So if you're trying to put green down over a very light value, it's going to look cheesy. And if you're trying to put yellow down over a dark value, it's going to look like mud. Just those kinds of things. Keep those kinds of things in mind. So also really quickly, I'm just going to show you the way that I go to color from gray is to make a color layer. So if you don't know how to make a color adjustment layer, really quickly, let me just show you. You create a new layer. It's really simple. You just go into your layer modes where this says normal, and you come down here to color. And that's just the way I start. Once I get a few colors down, I do other things like using multiply and overlay and normal modes and color dodge and all those things. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump over now to the actual painting process. I've sped it up ×2, so it's just 2 times faster than I actually did it, and we'll take a look at that process. Okay, so you can see here I'm just setting my layer mode to color like I showed you on the opening part of the video. I've picked a blue that's pretty light, pretty low saturation. You can see all the colors I'm picking if you just look in the color box there, so if you want to keep track. And this initial going to colors, this is all very rudimentary stuff. Like it's not, you're not looking for some kind of final product. You're just kind of getting it over to color and trying to maintain some sense of the value range that you wanted to paint, that you established your painting in, and that's really important. And so you're just trying to get some color down on the canvas to kind of start working with. So here you can see how low saturation I'm staying with everything. Kind of I'm thinking about the value that I started with, what value am I painting on? So how dark can the values get without, before I start changing the fundamental location in space that this is supposed to be. Um, and for my focal point, the value does this mountain, the value does get a bit darker as I go along. I was keeping an eye on it, and it's something that I decided in order to really give it the attention that it needs as I paint the contrast and the focal point up. I just decided to kind of let some of that slide a bit, and then as I get into the very last looks of the painting, I'll probably do a very quick atmospheric perspective airbrush pass over it, just to ease everything back into the original value that I wanted it to be. Um, but for the sake of really pushing that focal point and the contrast of my area of interest as much as I wanted to, I just went ahead and kind of let it go. As I get into light and shadow, you'll see how it starts to get a little darker. As I check back to my values, you'll see that it looks a little too dark in the overall composition. But yeah, I was keeping an eye on it. I knew that that was happening, and I made a decision as I went along. And you have to do this. You have to kind of stay aware and make decisions like, okay, am I going to deal with this now? Am I going to knock back some of my saturation and my colors, and am I going to knock back some of the value, or am I going to do that later, kind of in like a last looks part of my painting? Okay, here you can see I'm actually putting like a blue down on these rocks, which might seem a little odd, but actually it really helps to make them feel more interesting. If you actually look at rocks, there's a lot of colors in them, and usually there's a play of like kind of coolers and warmer. And so, you get a little bit of a blue underneath, and then a little bit of brown, kind of a brown gray. Like they're both very gray colors. So you get a bit of a blue gray and a bit of a brown gray, and they kind of play nicely together, and it makes it feel a little bit more believable. Here I'm getting that path laid in, like I mentioned I was going to, just to kind of make it feel like, if let's say for example this is a video game and it's a playable world, you would want the player to know, hey, if you go down that way, you can get to this place. Unless it's like a secret, like somewhere where you're not supposed to know how to get to it. And then if that was the case, then the path that I already established down below wouldn't be there either. So um, I a few episodes ago I mentioned whether I want this place to feel like it's like good, protagonist place, or if it's a antagonist place or somewhere in between. And I said I want it to be somewhere in between, but once I made the decision to kind of use that New Zealand landscape as my main inspiration for the color palette, I realized that it's probably gonna lean more and more and more and more into like, this is a pretty inviting place. Like this is somewhere like you've been questing a long time to get here, and you are really happy to get here. Okay, so now I've merged my color layer mode over the top of my grayscale. I like to keep things merged down as I work, if I can. And I've created a layer over the top of that now, set it to multiply, and I'm using a pretty light grayish blue, and I'm just starting to paint in my first shadows now. And I go immediately to that focal point, and paint in that cast shadow I mentioned in episode 3, I believe, that I was going to lay a cast shadow across, because the cliff is actually kind of jutting out on either side of the entry gate. And so basically getting that cast shadow to come across is not only is it showing the viewer that that cliff is actually coming out and catching light and casting a shadow, it's also making our main area of interest quite literally the first thing you'll see, especially once I get light against that shadow. It really grabs the eye. It is by far the most interesting thing in the painting. So that's definitely something you should be thinking about when you're working on your own pieces. Like, it's great to have more than one interesting thing to look at, but how well are you selling your focal point versus just some random rock off on, the right side of the canvas? Like, if the rock on the right side of the canvas is not your focal point and it's more interesting than your focal point, you should probably think about what you're doing with your lighting or your detail or your color palette or something. You need to find some way to make sure that your area of interest is interesting. Okay, so I'm still going through here with that multiply layer, same multiply layer, and I'm just enriching the feeling of the painting in general, the depth. I don't actually go into a ton of detail in this paint, because the next episode on using photo textures, that's going to be, we're going to lay in some sense of detail, and then we're going to paint that out, or over it. We're going to glaze over it and make sure that it's a painting at the end of the day. But there's no point in going into high detail and then slapping a photo over it and then painting over the photo. That's just a total waste of time. So it's all just indicated detail. I don't really go that crazy with it. This is more establishing the color palette. That's what this is all about. Okay, there's a check. You can see that cliff is darker. Just that bit darker now than it was. It's reading a little darker than it was when I did the last episode. Just my value comp. And I caught that, like I said, but we'll deal with it later. Okay, so now I'm painting in light. So we've got a layer over the top of multiply set to the layer mode overlay. You can see I've grabbed a color that's like similar to the blue I had, where it's very gray, a little bit of color, and quite light in value. And only we're in the yellow now instead of the blue. And I'm just painting in light against that shadow now. And you'll notice there I'm hitting that focal point really hard with the light, harder than pretty much anywhere else, to get that play of light through there to really read. And again, just establishing the shape and form here, the form mostly, not even really the shape. The shape's been established. I'm really just trying to pull form out of this stuff now. And, the shifting values, which is what's happening underneath that color, what we're seeing is value shift. And that's what's establishing the plane changes, which makes us see form. Getting in there and working in some more of this mist from the waterfall. Thinking about what areas are getting hit the hardest by light due to the having a plane that faces my light source. I've talked about this before, but I'll talk about it again. If you think about light, if light is coming down at this direction and something is perpendicular to that light, it's going to strike that surface perfectly dead on. Therefore, that surface will be the most lit. If something's turned away from that light or almost parallel to that light, it's going to be very dark or not lit at all, kind of a thing. Okay, here I've started I'm still on my overlay layer, but I've started messing with the overall tonal nature of the sky, of the mood of the light in general. Brought a lot of orange into it because I want to change the time of day. So I started with just a very basic time of day setting, and now I'm impacting that time of day with light, which the way I like to work, it's kind of practical in that way, where it's like, what do we actually see in real life? When the sky starts to turn, it's still a blue sky if you look in one direction, generally speaking, and then it's as you get closer to the sun that you start to feel the impact of that, the color of the sun setting, hitting clouds and things like that. And so, you know, kind of thinking about, like, if you start working over that original blue, you'll get more authentic tones, because that's still being impacted by color. Whereas you know, if you get, I mean, if you're looking at a sunset, sure, you can just make the whole sky like a very vivid orange and yellow and pink, especially if you're going slightly stylistic. But the sun is behind us in this case, so this part of the sky has to look like it's getting the impact of a lot of distance between it and the reflected light, or the bounce light of the sun bouncing around. It's not the sun side, if that makes any sense. The sun's back here, over my right hand shoulder, and above a little bit. So it's just important to keep those kinds of things in mind. Now I'm using color dodge, and I'm really starting to make some things sparkle and read as getting hit really hard by that light. The edge of that waterfall, the, you know, a little area along my main focal point, just little parts of the rocks that, like I said, those planes that are facing directly perpendicular to my light source. Want to hit them hard. This I'm just looking for like a little bit of like a sun glare feel. Kind of like when if you're shooting something with a camera and you turn a certain way at a certain angle, the sun kind of glares across your lens. Just a bit of a, kind of a lens flare, basically, kind of a feel. And then I'm hitting right where my person is standing, my adventurer. I'm hitting there because they are another point of interest. And my third point of interest, the birds, I'll paint those in at the end. I'm not worried about them right now, but yeah, so getting the grass lit up there, right where my adventurer is standing, helps push that contrast, make sure that you see them. And I didn't go to color with the adventure. I'm actually going to paint them separately, and then like a real version of them separately, and then stamp them into the shot. Yeah, just really just doing like a last little hints here. I think I decided, yeah, I'm warming up that horizon a bit, like as to say that the light is getting across the way and hitting those. And then I'm erasing out some of the shadows to show that it doesn't quite make its way all the way into all the crevices of that stuff. And this is with overlay over the top of my, you know, so I've got basically my original painting. I've got one multiply, one overlay, a normal, a color dodge, and then another overlay, and that's everything I've done, and that's it. So we've gone to color here. In the next episode, like I said, we're going to be going to photo texture, and that's going to start to beef up the actual detail. So the last episode will basically be detail, like really working the details. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you learned something. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, give the video a like, comment if you have something to say about it, and I will see you guys in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.